Another candidate forum today. We have the two candidates running for House District 13B joining me here in the studio today. We have the incumbent Republican Tim O'Driscoll here. Tim, good afternoon.
Greetings, Jim. Thanks for the opportunity to be with you and the listeners at the News at Noon.
Yeah, and also here with us is the challenger, the Democrat, Heidi Everett is here as well. Heidi, thanks for coming in.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So let's first of all talk a little bit about the district, 13B. See if I have this correct. Basically, it's most of Sauk Rapids and Sartell, and then the townships of Holding, Brockway, St. Wendell, and then the northern part of Avon Township. Does that kind of sound right?
And Holdingford as well.
Yep.
And the city of Holding.
The city of St. Stephen.
Yep. Okay. So that's what we're talking about for District 13B. Tim O'Driscoll, you won this election back in 2016 for this seat, 70% to 30% over the Democrat then. That was Matthew Krause. So, Tim, talk a little bit about yourself. For those folks who aren't familiar with Tim O'Driscoll, tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. Thanks again for the opportunity to be here and to visit with listeners as they make their decisions this fall on who they want to represent them in St. Paul. I grew up in the city of Sartell. My dad was the police chief there, the very first police chief. We had about 790 people that lived in the community when my dad and mom moved our family there from St. Cloud. My dad worked for the Minnesota correctional system out of the St. Cloud facility and moved all the way from St. Cloud to Sartell. And yes, at that time, that was a long trek. There was a lot of open space between the cities of St. Cloud and Sartell at that point. And he took the job as the police chief. And interestingly enough, I always tell people there's about 790 people in town, which happened to be my dad's badge number. So I usually kind of correlate those two together. We grew up in Sartell, went to Sartell High School. And at the time that we moved to the community, there was a big push on to create a school district and build a high school. How things have changed, but have not really changed. We're building a high school again in Sartell because of the massive growth in the community. I've been actively involved in the community and volunteerism, different kinds of things that was important for our family, and it was a trait that my parents instilled in my brothers and myself as we were growing up. Was on the Sartell City Council for a short stint, had to leave that position in the early 90s because of a job transfer to St. Paul. In 2000, I was able to come back here to the central Minnesota area, and in 2002 ran for city council, was elected. 2006 ran for mayor unopposed in the city of Sartell, and in 2010 and currently have been serving central Minnesota in the Minnesota legislature.
All right, Tim, thank you. Heidi Everett, tell us a little bit about who you are and a little bit about your background.
All right. Well, my name's Heidi, as you said, and I came to central Minnesota in 1988 to go to college and stayed here, thought it was a nice place to raise a family. My husband and I have 4 kids. We live on a hobby farm in St. Wendell Township. I have not been a career politician. I've usually been working as a volunteer on the receiving end of votes that happen at the state and federal level. So I've served as PTA president for Kennedy Community School, and I've served on a local board here that raises funding for District 742. I've worked on the Chamber of Commerce Workforce Development Committee and Brian Kleinfelter Memorial Foundation, advocating for workers' rights and family-friendly workplace initiatives. And I served for 8 years representing 1,200 former coworkers who lost their retirements and their jobs when directors and officers of our company cashed in their stock and financially decimated the company. So I've been an active volunteer since I've moved to town. My professional career has focused on marketing communications, and I've served higher ed, nonprofit, international business, as well as the technology sector. At the same time, I've taught writing and communication courses at St. Cloud State and St. Cloud Tech College, and currently I'm a professor of communications and journalism at Moorhead, and got into this race because the state of our political and social discourse does not represent the values that I raised my children by, and I don't think it represents the values of Minnesotans, and it certainly hasn't been Minnesota nice.
So it sounds like this is the first time you've run for office then?
Correct.
So how does that happen? How does one all of a sudden decide they're going to run for a state house seat? I mean, do people approach you? Do you go to the party and say you want to be a part of this? I mean, how did that all happen for you?
I have always been interested in politics. Certainly when I was in high school and college, I was involved in student government and the University Judicial Board and things of that nature. And I always thought I would grow up to be a political speechwriter. And certainly I was a presidential speechwriter for most of the corporations and organizations that I worked for. The 2016 election and the tenor leading up to the 2016 election really changed my perspective. And at that point, my husband and I talked and decided that it was time that I shifted from volunteering and throwing money at a problem to actually stepping up engagement to help solve the problem. So after the 2016 election, I participated in the Women's March on Washington in January and was hopeful that the messages of equality and respect and integrity and caring and being civil with one another would be heard and emanate from the White House. And we've seen that that clearly has not happened. And so my husband and I talked it over. I changed careers and we jumped in.
Okay. Tim, talk a little bit about your reasons why you want to continue to be a lawmaker down in St. Paul representing District 13B.
That's a great question, Jim. And I will be seeking my 5th term. And as anyone who's been involved in any kind of, whether it be government or private sector structure, and I've seen it both, and I've worked on both of those, it takes some time to be able to get some seniority and to be able to get some opportunities to be able to be toward the top of the decision-making platform. And going into my 3rd term and now my 4th term, I've been able to get a lot of traction in being able to do that. I'm really pleased to be able to report again to Central Minnesota that after a 3-year effort and a strong bipartisan approach and resolution, we were able to pass under my leadership a pension reform and stabilization bill for the hundreds of thousands of employees in the state of Minnesota and Minnesota political subdivisions and retirees, so that they can know that their pension benefits are going to be there. The other benefit that we've received in Minnesota is that Minnesota's AAA credit rating has been restored. Worked very closely with the governor's office and with Myron Franz, the commissioner of MMB Management and Budget, to be able to make that happen. We've made some pretty good strides, I think, in Minnesota, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about health care a little bit later on our discussions today, but we've done some really good things, and I think there's more work that needs to be done there. And I also think that I bring a pretty civil tone to from Central Minnesota to the legislature. This last session, Governor Dayton signed a number of bills, and I was the #1 House member to have bills signed by Governor Dayton this past year. And in the previous years, when we've been in the majority, I've either been #1 or #2, depending upon the year.
Okay. Heidi, as I mentioned earlier, in the 2016 race, it was a 70%, 30% vote margin. How do you overcome that? How do you convince at least some of those 70% that voted Republican last time to switch over to the Democratic side and your side this time around?
Yeah, I believe that elections are won or lost on the doorstep, and the more conversations that you can have with folks in the district, the better off your campaign will be. I've been door knocking since January, have been in just about every weather type that Minnesota can offer, and now we're in mosquito season. What I'm hearing over and over again is that our voters are tired of the lack of civility. And let me give you an example of this. I know last week Jeff Howe was on this program, and he had talked about how close we were to the Republicans having, and his exact words were, full control of state government. Full control is not the language of compromise. It is not the language of civility. It is the language of wanting people to vote who look and act and think like you. And that's not what Minnesota needs. We need leaders who can work with all types of Minnesotans, because we are a very rich, diverse community, and the issues that we have ahead of us with healthcare, infrastructure, and education spending need that civility and working with others.
All right. We're going to take a break. We have to get some news on, so we're going to do the news break, and then we'll come back and continue to talk with Heidi and Tim in the next half hour here on the News at Noon show.